Tonight, tensions between the U.S. and Iran escalating after Secretary of State blames Iranians for the attack on an oil plant in Saudi Arabia. Certainly all the evidence suggests it was them. But instead of focusing on unifying our country, unifying us with our allies against a brutal regime, you got far-left freshman Congresswoman Ilhan Omar taking this moment to do what? Sow more division, to sow more hate, and of course, to bash President Trump. Here she is.
Congress has the constitutional right to declare war. The president doesn't have it. I think we need to make sure that the American people understand that this administration that lies about weather maps or crowd sizes cannot be trusted to give us the full information we need.
All right, joining me right now, American Islamic Forum for Democracy founder, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser, good to see you again. I want to know what you think Ilhan Omar's rhetoric is really about.
Well, Trish, it's really about a primary lens of being anti-Trump, of being basically not about representing everyone in her district. It's about representing the most those are our most radical on the margins, if you will. And I have to tell you, she's doing untold damage to our community as far as Muslims are concerned, in that Americans see our ally attacked in acts of war in Saudi Arabia. NATO ships have been attacked in the Straits, cargo ships, and these are acts of war, and her response is to do sort of the sarcastic, snide remarks on the Sunday morning programs and on CNN and elsewhere, when in fact this is a time to unify us. This is a time to make clear what our strategy should be, and her talking points are being put on front page of Iranian press TV and anti-American propaganda, and that's how Muslims get radicalized.
I actually was thinking about you last night because we covered Ilhan Omar, and we looked back to her comments about 9/11, her recent comments about 9/11, where she said, some people just did something, and she didn't like that she and the Muslim community were paying the price. And I thought about you in particular, Dr. Jasser, because you've been so outspoken to really emphasize the good in the Muslim community and get away from sort of this victimization, if you would. So while she's out there saying, hey, they've painted us all the same way, and this is, just because some people did something, there's a lack of sensitivity, right? Like a lack of sensitivity to people who lost loved ones, to the fact that this was the biggest attack on our home soil ever. She has no sensitivity for that, and yet says, everybody has to, feel for her. Is this I think it's a victimization thing, and I actually think it really does a disservice to the Muslim community, whereas you have a very different platform. Walk me through those two different ways of thinking, if you could, in our brief amount of time.
Trish, it's gaslighting. They want to distract Americans into being defensive. It's just like the Ground Zero Mosque folks, where they thought, they might have a right to do it, but it wasn't the right thing to do 8-9 years ago when that came in the news. And now this moral equivalency dance that they say, oh, we condemn Al-Qaeda. She didn't even say Al-Qaeda, but we condemn these radical jihadists. But yet they say that, well, what about the but? There is no moral equivalency to an act of war that killed 3,000 of our fellow citizens, and then all that came after to get them in Afghanistan and elsewhere. It just minimizes it, and it really does a disservice into Americans thinking that our lens is about an Islamic lens rather than first and foremost and only an American lens.
No, so well said. Keeping with that theme, there's another story that's in the news tonight, and that's that the Women's March just announced a few new board members, and one in particular has some pretty frightening statements, Dr. Jasser. This woman, Zara Bilu, writes that there's basically no difference between the U.S. military and terrorists. Here she is in 2017, and I quote, saying, the U.S. military, ISIS or Al-Qaeda, I believe all of them are comparably evil. And just last year, she wrote that the Israeli army is murderous and war crime committing. So this is who they're choosing, Zuhdi. This is who they want to represent them in the Women's March?
It shows you who's driving the boat at the Women's March. They went from Linda Sarsour to this. It's like going from an alcoholic to a coke addict when you're trying to get rid of substance abuse. I mean, this is how our community is being radicalized. The leadership of our community looks at our military not as the most moral fighting force, or our allies, the greatest democracy in the Middle East, Israel, as a moral fighting force, but rather as ISIS. And it's not just her. The head of CARE LA has said the same language, and they don't apologize. They dig their heels in and double down on it, and they're running the Women's March. Why? Because the head of the spear of this red-green alliance between the Islamists and the socialists is basically gaslighting America into thinking that it's not about patriotism and unifying the country. It's not about women's rights. It's about keeping us on the defense while the socialists around the world and the Islamists push back and begin to influence more and more of global strategy and threaten America's interests.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't know what's happened to, you know, a sense of, well, to use a Trump phrase, I guess, America first, that patriotism, right, that we all grew up with, that you want Americans to have. And now suddenly that's just not cool. Dr. Jasser, thank you so much. It's good to see you. Coming up.